Alright, hello guys. I'm going to summarize Chapter 1 from Coercion and Its Fallout by Murray Sidman. So I'm talking about the introduction as well because I think it's really important. It gives an introduction to Chapter 1 and it's about the same length as Chapter 1. There's not a whole lot of pages. So he starts with defining what coercion is, and most of you kind of already know what he means, but maybe wouldn't know how to define it exactly. So it's using punishment or even negative reinforcement to make someone do what you want them to. It can also be a threat, whether it's explicitly said or implied, that if you don't do something, then something bad will happen or something harmful. And yes, as we know, it can work great, especially um, with our kids sometimes, but it starts to lose effectiveness eventually, and it starts showing those side effects, whether it's aggression or anxiety or boredom or not wanting to do anything, kind of losing interest in activities. So he talks about a few different institutions or areas in life where coercion is active and the negative consequences that it has had and it still has. So international politics, in the home, school, relationships, at work. So, for instance, we've had this nuclear arms race, and the U.S. has actually used these weapons and killed a lot of people. But we're constantly reminded of how close we've come and how close we are to nuclear annihilation. So even though we've never been hit with a weapon, we're constantly reminded of this, and it's not good for our mental health. So he mentions counter control, which is something that we've learned about before, that can be produced by coercion. And while it is useful, it's a useful tool for people who use it. We'd rather just not have to use it in the first place. So yeah, there's much better ways of getting people to do what we want. Um, and eventually, counter control can get nasty. It's not usually just a little problem. You have things like political revolutions or um, employees stealing from work or murdered spouses, stuff like that. So he talks about how we should be looking at um, coercion as something not to be morally agreed with or disagree. You like it or you don't. It's just something that's not effective, and that should be the most important thing. It's just not effective. So if it's something's not working, it's our responsibility, especially in ABA, to show people what has been empirically shown to be effective. And that's usually our positive reinforcement. So, even though a lot of our problems now are global, they're very complex, it does become harder to analyze them and to figure out how to approach it, to even begin to fix these problems. But because of the importance of them, the arms races, the climate change, poverty, education reform, we do have to try. And for now, the principles of behavior that ABA has consistently revealed can be a starting point to address them and interpret them better, maybe on a smaller scale. So starting chapter 1, Discoursive World, he begins by giving some examples of coercion that we constantly hear and we probably don't notice, and we probably are dishing out ourselves. So you do this, or something bad will happen. Um, for me lately, I got a new car and been buying a lot of things. So, I get these things in the mail. Pay us each month, or for insurance. If you fall, disability insurance. If you fall and break your legs, you won't have income for a month. You won't be able to eat, or you won't be able to afford rent. So that kind of thing is coercion. And it's usually that negative reinforcement contingency. So, I may start paying that disability insurance out of my paycheck each month so I can avoid having no income when I break my legs. Um, or, we keep drudging through the tax process every year and paying our taxes so that we don't go to jail. We escape the law or the consequences of the law. We escape going to jail. So by this time, most of us have learned, RBTs, ABA people have learned that telling people what not to do is not quite as effective, and it's kind of inefficient, and it doesn't expose our kids or our adults um, to those reinforcement opportunities. It doesn't give them good access to reinforcement. It just kind of shuts it down. So somewhat recently, I did this. Kid was starting to tantrum a little, and I was kind of desperate. I wasn't thinking. I said, if you don't help me clean, you don't get to paint. And I said it a few times. And it didn't work. And at that point, it would have taken less time and probably been more effective to say, um, you know, you can help me paint once you put that toy on the shelf, and sat down with the paints and just waited her out. But instead, it didn't really end well. We ended the session early because she just kind of escalated and had more tantrum behavior. So now he talks about where coercion comes from, so how we've learned it as humans and have passed it on to our children and other people. So it's the natural physical environment that it kind of started from. So that threatens us constantly, especially, it did way back in the past, but now it's starting to even more with this extreme weather. So nature, you know, it says if you don't do these things in preparation for my hurricane or for my winter storm, like right now, if you don't get your bread and eggs, they have this like implied coercion in the weather forecast. If you don't do these things, you will freeze to death. Your house, your shutters, everything will be blown away. And while many of us now do have the privilege of being able to feel free from this threat of nature or extreme weather, we are still vulnerable to these physical threats. And we're more vulnerable than we think. It wouldn't take much to make us very vulnerable. And we may become even more pressured by nature if things continue to go the way that they're going. So this probably kind of leaked into our social interactions eventually and became more natural. And people just take them as what they are. Something that can't really be changed, just what we do. So he did touch on the word freedom then, and what it means to be free and what it meant to Skinner. So, lost my place here. So, something that's been used for a long time. It's used a lot. We say this word, we throw this word around, especially now in America. It has a long history, it's a very prevalent use, and it's kind of used in conjunction or implied with coercion or oppression. So he's kind of talking about if we had less coercion and punishment, the term may have a different meaning for us than it currently does. So, he says, do you think it would mean something different than just, and he quote, the absence of coercion? And that quote's from page 26. And people love the idea of freedom, having no one to tell you what to do and choosing everything for yourself. Of course, we know there's not really quite free will, freedom. Everything is controlled by something else and by each other. Well, talking about better ways to do that. But if we could just mollify or eliminate some of those sources that require us to desire freedom, that would be ideal and wouldn't be so necessary or desirable, that freedom. So, in conclusion, he just wants us to start being aware of and being able to identify those coercive things that we may be doing. So starting on the smallest scale that we can, things that we're doing in our relationships or with our coworkers, especially with our kids. Like I said, for me, being, trying to stay aware of what I'm saying and what I'm doing. So yes, like I said, control will always be used, but it doesn't have to be coercion. Control doesn't have to be negative, and using more of that positive reinforcement. So he mentioned that therapists who use those coercive techniques are just doing what many others of us are doing, and they often get scolded or whatever, but he's saying, well, look around, it's just natural. It's what they've been taught by their probably by their parents some, or their teachers, or professors, or government leaders. But, at the end he says, ABA therapists, since we have learned what works better, and we continue to learn that, we have a duty to use that and to advocate for these better techniques. So there's my citation, my reference. And for the discussion, I want you to think of a recent time that you used coercion in your home or with your friends or partner, and maybe what a better method that you could have used to influence their behavior. Thank you.